introduction to the Radiant software and how you can use it to solve your first pre-class assignment. My goal with this is to show you that Radiant's actually really easy to use and that you can spend most of your time interpreting your results rather than trying to code them or do anything crazy like that. So I expect that you know how to get to this screen. Radiant is run in a web browser, but if you go to any R session and just type in the word Radiant, as I showed you in the tutorial, you should be able to get to the screen instantly. If you don't know how to do this, please post in the Slack and the rest of us can help you out. But coming to this screen should be very easy, quick, and natural to you. But okay, so this is the default screen of Radiant. This is where you'll come to as soon as you open it. So the first thing you might want to do is load some data in, right? There's some nice preloaded data sets in here, like the Titanic data sets or the Diamonds data set that you can play with. But we want to look at a specific data set for this class. So I'm going to go to this section here called load data. And I don't want to load an R data file because I've given you a CSV. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to load a CSV. Kind of ignore this stuff for now. We don't need to click on anything. And then I'm going to click load. And then here, I'm going to go into my desktop because I know that's where I have it saved. And then I'm going to click on this loans clean.csv. Okay, so this is now the data sort of read in, but as you can see, there may be a couple issues. The first issue is it kind of read in these comments, and these aren't really variables or anything like that, so we might want to get rid of them. And then we have this not fully paid variable that looks like a number, but actually this is our label. So this should be just a 0 or 1, not necessarily a number. So why don't we fix that first? So to fix these things, we can go to the transform section under the data tab here. So I'll click on transform. And maybe the first thing I want to do is get rid of these variables here. So I'm going to click transformation type, scroll down, pretty far down, if I'm not mistaken, to remove/reorder variables here under clean data. And then I'm just going to delete that and these two because these are not part of our data. So now they're deleted, we can see up here in this window that it did what we wanted it to do. And once we confirm that this is actually what we wanted, I'm going to click the store button down here. And it's going to overwrite my original data set, as you can see. So I will lose everything I've done before, but that's okay because I never wanted that stuff in the first place. So I click store and it's saved. This is now my new data set. And now what I want to do is transform this variable into a label, right? A 0 or 1, not necessarily a number. So to do that, I'm going to first click on that variable here. So now I've selected it. And then I'm going to click transform. I'm going to click change type. All right, so right now it's a number, but I can change the type. And I can change it to a factor. In this case, a factor is like a 0 or a 1 without any ordering. And that's one of the data types. So I'll change it to a factor. And then I'm going to again overwrite it back into my original data set, store. So that's great. Now we can see that my data looks like what I wanted to. This looks like now like a label, right? And I don't have any of the comments on the side that really didn't have anything to do with my data set. So the first thing I sort of asked you to do is to do some nice plots, and I won't do all the plots for you right now, but if we click on manage, we can first see that the data set definitely was saved correctly. And now we can see we have a lot of other tabs up here where we might be able to do some data exploration. You can go to the Explore tab over here and create some tables for everything. So if you can see there are already some functions down here under the applied functions tab, and you can select as many variables as you want, maybe 1, 2, or 3, right? And immediately create some tables that have some of these nice statistics for us, right? So number of observations, the mean of each variable, min, max, and you can really do this for any of them, and you can apply more functions if you want. And I'll let you play with this. And also, maybe as of note, once you create a table that you like and you want me to see, go down to this notepad option at the very bottom right, and you can do this anytime you have a plot or an observation you want me to see. Click on that, and it immediately will take you to this report tab. Now, do not write in these in this blue text where you have 3 dashes and the R sign. Don't write in here. This is code, and it's written there nicely for you, so don't write in there. But you can write above and below it. For example, these two hashtags up here. This is your title, so you might say my first Radiant file, and then you have some code that has that table I just made. And so if you click knit report, boom, oops, spelled first wrong. We'll reknit that. Now you have a PDF with a title, and you have the table. And this is great because now as we're going through this exercise, you can put all of these nice observations here in this nice file, and you can export it as a PDF at the end and send me that. That way I never have to look at your code, but I can always see your results. Now this is going to be really nice for the rest of the class. So let's go back to the data tab. So we have these nice tables. You can make these tables, put them in your report if you want. You can also do visualizations. Right, so if you want to do any plot, click on this Visualize tab. And maybe you just want to do some distributions, again, because you're exploring. So you can do distributions of one variable. You can create that plot. You can do multiple variables at the same time, etc. And you can see you have many plots to pick from. So now we see you have 3 plots here. Again, if you wanted to put these into your report tab as well, again, you would just click this report results. You can see that this code now went right under the first code. So you can see like this is my first table, and maybe the second one here is my first plot. And you can see as I click Knit Report, again, this table, let it load, this table here stays. Maybe we should go to a little bit of space so it doesn't look as strange. So there we can see my first plot here, my first table here. And now you can have your table and your plot, and they're all on the same page. You can see now how we can start to add a lot of results. And I can teach you later on how to sort of format some of this text, but it's not super important. If you want to do bold, the double hashtag, just like you had up here, will work. But what I would expect is every time you add something, oops, actually the double hashtag doesn't work, don't do that. But what I would expect is that every time you add something to this file, you go through and add explanations. So I would add an explanation about what these are telling you, right? And same with this table up here. So I expect you to add text here telling me what each of these things are and why they're useful to you. And that's what I would expect from an exploration step, right? This is supposed to help you get a better understanding of the data, right? And I want you to communicate the understanding of your data through me, through this nice PDF. So now you know how to do some nice plots and some nice tables, right? That you can easily report to me and share with your team, right? So that's great. So we'll go back to the data tab. And you could do a lot of these things and sort of show me, right? And there are a lot more options that I've not shown you in this video so far, and we'll sort of learn more of them. And honestly, probably will not get to all of them in this class, but I encourage you to play around with it. And the options are sort of endless. But the thing you might be interested in now is how do you run a model, right? So let's say, like in the pre-class assignment I gave you, you would want to run a logistic regression and a decision tree. And I want you to do this through the validation set approach, right? So let's start with the validation set approach, and then we'll create a model. So in the validation set approach, I need a training and a testing data set, right? So the first thing is, how do I get that? Well, as I said in the video, you need to split this loans clean data set in half or to some proportion. So to do that, I go to this transform tab under the data section, and then I'm going to click transformation type, and I'm going to scroll towards the bottom onto the split data section and click training variable. I'm going to click that, and then I need to decide how much of my data do I want to use to train my model. As I said in class, some people typically use 50%. Right now, it's sort of defaulted to 70, but I can write any number in here I want. Let's just do 50% because that's what I said in class. But again, you can choose really anything you want. And you can see what it does is it adds this variable training that is just a bunch of ones and zeros. And really all this means is if my size is 50%, that means it's a random variable where half of the instances in this variable are ones and half are zeros. So I can use this to split my data, where if this number is a 1, I'm going to use it to train my model, and if the number is a 0, I'm going to use it to test my model. Again, if this doesn't make sense to you, please go back to the validation set video that I showed you. So once I have this variable, I'm going to click store again, so it's added to my data set. Stored, boom, you can see now it's here on the far left, and I can use this to subset my model. So I'm about to go train my model. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm only looking at the training data. So the filter I'm going to type in here is training is double equal to 1. And make sure you write the double equal here, not a single equal. That's very important. And I don't want to get too technical into it, but a double equal basically means it's checking if it's equal to 1. If you wrote a single equal, it would mean something very different. And I'm happy to talk about this more. But make sure when you're subsetting the data, you write training is double equal to 1. Training here corresponds to the variable name, right? And then 1 corresponds to the instances of the data set that I'm going to use to train my model. That's sort of the random split that I'm doing. All right, so now that I have this, the data is filtered. I'm filtered to that observation. And then I'm going to go to model, and let's start with the logistic regression. All right, so click logistic regression. Right, and then now what I want to do is tell it what it's estimating. Well, it already knows that I'm looking at the loans clean data set. That's great. And then what do I want to predict? Well, I want to put the not fully paid variable. That's a factor, right? We did this earlier. And what level do you want to predict? Well, let's just predict level 1, right? This is sort of like if you're going to default or not. And then you need to decide what variables do you want to use when estimating this model. I'm going to use all of them except for the training variable because it wouldn't make sense to include the training variable. That wasn't data. That's just something we externally added to do the training testing data sets. And then for now, this sort of is it. You can click some of these other options if you want to explore some other diagnostic tools, but maybe you want some things like confidence intervals, things like that. So you have a slider here to slide what type of confidence interval you want. So things with a certain level of confidence. But really all you need to do here is select the variables you want. Like I said, I'll click those, select those, and then I'll click estimate model. And boom, this is my logistic regression, right? And you can see how important each variable was. So 3 stars means that it's a very significant variable. Less than that means a little less, right? And now we have things like confidence intervals around the effect of each these variable, things like that. And I won't go super deep into this, but make sure you know how to read a variable like this. And also, if you remember from A/B testing, we sort of had these null and alternative hypotheses, right? And you can see that in Radiant, these pop up again, right? But don't stress too much about all the information that comes out of this. I think it's very overwhelming, especially if you've never seen it at the first time. But this is your logistic regression. This is the model, right? And we'll go more in the class about sort of how to interpret all these tables, but right now you know how to do it. And as you can see, we have the filter in place. So it's only looking at where training is equal to 1. And that's great because that means that the model was only tested on half the data set, half the data set where that training variable is equal to 1. So you can imagine where training variable is equal to 0, we can use that to predict. So now how do we predict on the testing data? Well, I click this predict tab, and you select prediction input type. Again, we're just giving it a data set, and the data we're giving it is the same loans clean data, right? And boom, I've now predicted on the entire data set. As you can imagine, actually what it's doing is it's predicting on both the training and the testing data, but later we're going to subset to only look at the predictions on the testing data set. But that's it. Now I've predicted onto the model, and once I have the predictions, I'm going to click store. So now it's stored in the data sets. Right, so if we go back to the data tab, we can now see what I've added, right? So now in the data set, what I've added is this predict logit, right? And this is quite nice, right? So remember, the logistic regression gives us a probability, right? And in this case, we had selected the probability of belonging to class 1, right? And so now this sort of gives us a number that corresponds to that, right? And so now the only thing we need to do is decide, well, how great of it, how big does this probability need to be in order for us to decide to let you go to class 1? A natural choice here could be 50%, and we'll discuss ways to make a better line, right? A better decision boundary. But maybe we just want to say, well, if the probability of you belonging to class 1 is greater than 50%, maybe we will assign you to class 1. We could do something like that. There's an easy way for us to do this in Radiant. So again, if we go to transformation type, because we're under the transform column under data, we go to transformation type, and then I click create new variable. So I'm going to click create, and I just now need to type in a formula to sort of get us this new variable. So I'm going to say this is the same way you would have done it in Excel. So I'm going to call a new variable. I'm going to call it logit predict. And I'm going to say this is equal to single equal this time, if else predict logit. If this is greater than 50%, I'm going to assign it. I'm going to assign it to class 1. If it's less than 50%, I'm going to assign it to class 0. And this is a number, so just because I really want to make sure that this is being read in as like a class, I'm just going to put it in text so it doesn't think this is a number. All right. Okay. So once I do that, you can see that this logit predict variable has now been created. So it looks like all my first instances had a probability less than 50%. Then I'm going to store it back in my data set. This storing is super important. And it looks like it did what it needed to, right? So I've not looked at the entire data set, but just at the first bit, we can see that all these probabilities are less than 50%, and all of these classifications have been aligned. I've been sent to class 0. And right now, actually, this agrees sort of with the original or the actual classification. So this is actually quite nice. So now what about decision trees? I can do the same exact thing. It's super easy, right? So we can see I'm still filtered to 1, which is really nice. So I'm going to go to model, classification, regression trees. And I'm going to do the same thing. What am I predicting? Not fully paid. Let's say, again, picked in class 1. And I need to decide all the variables I want in here. And obviously, these 3 variables on here have nothing to do with the data. So I'm just going to select all the data set variables. And then I'm going to click estimate model. I'm not going to touch anything else right now. It's a huge regression tree that comes out of this, right? And um, you can imagine that I can look at these plots. So I click plot and I click tree. This is actually quite a complicated tree, right? And maybe too complicated actually to make decisions on. In reality, you would never give this to your boss. It's way, way too complicated, right? So let's maybe go back to summary, and I'll teach you sort of like the first pruning technique here, and we'll just play with this, and we'll learn about more of these hopefully in class. But you can imagine the maximum amount of nodes you would want here, maybe let's just say is 10, just to make things a bit easier. So I'll type in 10, and I'll say re-estimate the model. And now we have a tree that's maybe a bit smaller, maybe something that's a bit more reasonable. So now again, we'll look at this plot real quick just to make sure this looks reasonable. And now this looks like a model that we can interpret, right? Look like the most important variable here was credit policy, right? And so if your credit policy was less than 50%, you had a 27% chance of defaulting, etc. And you can follow this line really down for anyone. And again, if you wanted to add this to your report, you would just click this button and then say down here, my first tree. And you should be doing this for anything you want in your reports. All right, there we go. Now the tree is down here in the report. Let's go back to the model because we're not done. Classification question. Now we need to make sure we predict. Right, so I'm going to say predict data, and again we're just predicting on the loans clean data set. And now we have our predictions, which again are probabilities. Right, we need to decide what we do with these probabilities. The logistic regression and decision trees only give us probabilities, right? And then we need to make a decision on where to make the cuts. So this is quite an important distinction. So now I click store. All right, so now these are stored, these probabilities are stored in my data set. So if I go back to data, there we go. Now I have the probabilities for my decision tree. And again, I can do the same thing to make a classification. So maybe I'll go back here to transformation, under the transformation tab. Then I'm going to click create new variable, create. Then I'm going to say predict CR tree, right? That's just what it's called up here. If this is, actually, well, let's call something new. We'll call it tree predict. This is equal to if else, if this pre-CR tree, if this is greater than 50%, we're going to assign it to class 1. If not, we'll assign it to class 0. All right, and then I can do this, right? And you can see again, this variable is created, and I'll store it to my data sets. All right, and there we go. Now I have a data set where I have my training variable, right? So the training variable here, and this tells me what part of my data I'm going to use to train the model, right? And what part I'm going to use to test. Then I have this probability of belonging to class 1 that was generated from the logistic regression, right? And then I classified with those probabilities, right? And the classification rule was if you have a probability greater than 50%, I put you in the class 1. If not, I put you in the class 0. And I did the same thing for decision trees, right? Where I got a probability from the decision trees, right? And then I made a classification from it. And again, at each of these steps, I would expect you to add this to your report, show me all the plots you did, and give me sort of some thinking behind what each of those things we're doing. Right, and then at the end of the day, you can make your confusion matrix, right, to sort of see how well you're doing. And to do that, we're just going to click this pivot table option up here. So you can click pivot. And so in this case, since I'm looking at my testing data, I want to look at where training is equal to 0. Right, so we'll filter the data where training is equal to 0. Right, and again, we're looking at my loans clean data, make sure it's still there. And then I need to select some variables, right? So I want to select the truth, which is the not fully paid variable. And then I need to select one of my estimated classes, which let's look at the logistic regression prediction. All right, so I can do this. And then what function do I want to apply? Well, I want to apply, let's see here. Well, actually, that's it. So it looks like I don't need to apply a function. You can see the logistic prediction here is on the row, and then the truth is on the top. So that's not fully paid variable is the truth, right? And then the logistic prediction here is on the rows. And you can see this is our confusion matrix. This is how many times they agreed for class 0, which is quite a lot. I like this is a big number. But it looks like actually our number of agreements for class 1 is only 5, which actually feels quite small. But as you can see, there actually weren't many instances of class 1. So I'd want you to investigate this number and let me know if you're comfortable with it. And here are the amount of mistakes. And you can see we made a lot of mistakes when the truth was actually class 1, but we predicted class 0. So I would want this to be smaller, personally, and we can think about ways of maybe making our model better. But this mistake doesn't look that bad. So when the truth was actually class 0. We only classified class 1 wrong 8 times, right? So this would be a nice pivot table that you can, again, add into your data. So I'll say this is my confusion matrix. And I can add this here. All right, this is great. And I would, again, expect a lot of explanation sort of behind this. And, you can do the same thing. So this one we use logistic regression prediction. We can do the same thing for decision trees and add it to your report. And then at the end of the day, really what I'm expecting you to do is to do everything I've sort of shown you. And then I would expect you to turn in this PDF to me. So you can click Save Reports at the end of the day. And then save it as a PDF and then upload it to Blackboard. This is sort of what I want. I think this has been a nice introduction to Radiant, and I expect you guys to have a lot of fun with this. I know it will feel maybe a little overwhelming at first, but I think it makes everything we're doing just so much easier. And we might go back to Excel for some other things, but for now, focus on getting a lot of these things right. There are a lot of options that you can pick from, so I encourage you to explore and have fun with it. And ask me or anyone else in the class if you have any questions. Thank you so much.